Welcome to another episode of Equity Mates. My name is Bryce, and as always, I'm joined by my equity buddy Ren. How are you going?
I'm very good, Bryce. Caught a little bit off guard there, but I am recovering. Excited to be here. Excited for Watchlist Wednesday, our favourite time of the week.
Absolutely, and I love it when we have new guests and experts joining us on the panel for Watchlist Wednesday. And it is our pleasure to welcome Emanuel Datt to Equity Mates on AusBiz. Emanuel, welcome.
Thanks, Bryce. Thanks, Ren.
So Emanuel is the managing director of Datt Group. He's a prolific on Twitter and someone we've wanted to have on for a while, and we're very excited to have you on today, Emanuel. So let's start. You've got three stocks to bring today that all sort of fit within a bit of a theme, and that is the transition towards cleaner energy. So before we get into the stocks, are you able to just give us a bit of a rundown as to why this is a focus for you and a bit about the thematic?
Yeah, absolutely. So from our perspective, the world is in the midst of what we call greenflation. So effectively, from the demand side, this means that there's a clear transition towards cleaner forms of energy, renewables, nuclear, etc. That's being driven by government policy, essentially. In addition, there's been a clear shift towards cleaner forms of transportation, i.e. electric vehicles. The main point I wanted to elaborate on this is that all these new forms of energy and transportation effectively rely on a higher level of technology. And that's really driving demand for electronic components, microprocessors, battery technologies, etc. And that's being done against the context of limited supply. Effectively, there's been years of underinvestment as a result of low commodity prices, and that sort of led to the most recent energy crisis, so to speak, where we've seen big rises in the price of coal, oil, and other fossil fuels. So effectively, that's the context in which we're making or discussing these three stocks today.
It is fascinating, Emanuel, and it's three companies that sit in a sector that Bryce and I probably haven't looked at a lot, which is mining. So we're excited to sort of, hear your take on some companies that we wouldn't have looked at too closely. So let's start at the top. The first company you've given us today is MLX. So can you tell us a little bit about the company and why it's on your watch list?
Yeah, sure. So with MLX, I'll probably explain a little bit about the tin market in which it operates. MLX itself is a tin producer who run a mine in Tasmania known as the Renison mine. So this is basically a world-class asset that's operated for well over 100 years. And as I mentioned, it produces tin. So what is tin? So tin is used in solder, which is effectively the glue for these electronic components, and it's totally unsubstitutable. The global tin supply itself is extremely constrained, less than days worth of supply available, and effectively the sources of supply are largely out of Asia and Africa, but also MLX makes a contribution to that. So it's a very small niche market. And we feel that there's quite a large potential for further increases, given that the cost of the tin itself within an average iPhone is a matter of 10 or 20 cents. So ultimately, a very, very small cost to the end product itself. And we feel that MLX has got quite a bit of leverage to higher tin prices overall. In terms of the financials itself, so MLX, we believe, at current tin prices, are currently generating about 50 million in revenue net to the company itself, with probably about half of that falling to the bottom line itself. So you can just extrapolate that and think, well, okay, that means that probably about 100 mil per annum is dropping to the bottom line if current circumstances and pricing persist. So to us, that really means the company looks very, very cheap at about 350 mil market cap, given the industry dynamics and what we foresee as being increased tin demand going into the future against limited tin supply. One little bonus that should also be mentioned is that Metals X has some legacy tin assets that should be spun off imminently. And in the last nickel boom, this is going back about 10 or so years, these assets were actually worth 250 million or thereabouts. So I think there's a big hidden value element in this stock itself as well.
Yeah, right. Well, with the context of this transition to cleaner energy, renewables, transportation, your next stock is Lynas. For those that haven't heard of Lynas before, what is it and why is it on your watch list?
Sure. So Lynas is a rare earths producer. Its mine is located in WA and it effectively mines material, sends it to Malaysia for processing. Rare earths themselves are essential material for new and emerging technologies, especially in things like magnets, which are used extensively in these electric vehicles, but also in wind turbines and other forms of renewable energy. But also for electronic components, again, in iPhones and such. Chinese production accounts for about 85% of global rare earth production. And Lynas, I believe, is the only producer that actually is non-Chinese based, making it a very, very strategic asset and producing these very, very important and strategic metals. So accordingly, there's a very large premium embedded in the price of Lynas itself, but that is really a reflection of its long life and very high quality assets, as well as its enormous strategic value. The company itself plan on bringing back part of the processing itself back to WA, but also there's discussions of opening up another plant in the US. So yeah, we feel that it's probably an expensive exposure, but it's something that we feel can't go wrong if you're a very long-term investor.
So Emmanuel, forgive my ignorance on this, but look, as I said, mining is definitely not my forte. I think Lynas has been spoken about on AusBiz and on our podcast for a number of years, and people often say, it's the only non-Chinese rare earth miner and processor. I guess my question is, we've been saying that for years. Is there any risk that other companies are going to enter the rare earth space? Is it just that there's no deposits, or is there some technological limitation that stops other companies entering that space? Is the fact that Lynas is the only one today, or the only non-Chinese one today, is that going to hold into the future?
I am expecting new operations to open up. Rare earths themselves, the extraction of rare earths from the ores itself is a very specialized process. So to give you a bit of context, Lynas themselves, I believe they started construction of their processing plant about 10 years ago or so. And it's only really within the last maybe 4 years that they've actually achieved the full nameplate capacity. So that is a very long ramp-up process to full production, 7 or so years. It took them to iron out all the various issues. And the Lynas ore body, which they're mining, is a very high grade and high quality deposit. These other competitors that are trying to get their projects off the ground, typically the quality of the deposit that they're mining is lower in terms of grade. So even though perhaps there is a risk capital out there to finance these new operations, we feel that it's a lot less risky to invest in a current producer who doesn't have the various risk factors of delivery and execution, but also the intellectual property itself and experience.
Yeah, interesting. Well, Emanuel, to close out today, your third stock is Whitehaven Coal. given that we were talking about the transition to cleaner energy and transportation, where does this one fit and why is it on your watch list?
Yeah, sure. So Whitehaven Coal, a coal producer, primarily their mines are on the eastern seaboard in New South Wales, and I believe they've got one in Queensland as well. So it produces primarily thermal coal, which is coal used for power stations and such, but also they produce coking coal, which is typically used in steel production as well. Their customers are primarily Japanese and Korean customers, and the coal they produce is very high quality. And while you might think, oh, well, coal company seems like a pretty strange choice for new and clean energy, I think that ultimately the reality is that the transition towards clean energy will require the use of existing fossil fuel energy sources. For example, wind turbines themselves are 80% steel by weight, and you can't make steel without coking coal. Solar panels as well require aluminium, also known as solid electricity, and that's primarily made with coal-based power. So effectively, the company they're currently making about $100 million per month at current coal prices. And so we think that this particular company, given the quality of the assets it holds, but also its cash generative ability at these current prices, makes it very, very cheap.
Nice. Well, Emanuel, thank you for joining us today. A really interesting insight into, as Ren said, companies that we're certainly aware of, but never really get our heads into the mining space. So I know that there's plenty of people in the Equity Mates community who do love this sector of the market, particularly, Lynas gets a lot of chatter in the Equity Mates group. So appreciate your expertise and sharing your thoughts and insights today. And we look forward to getting you back on at some stage. So thanks for sharing your time today.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for having us.
And that does bring us to the end of our Watchlist Wednesday. For more info on Emanuel, as I said, he's on Twitter, so make sure you go and check him out. And for more info on what we do, head to equitymates.com to find plenty other videos from Watchlist Wednesday. But tomorrow, Ren, we are back for the final day of AusBiz.
That's it. Join us, same time, same place. Can't wait to see you.